Guys, welcome to another episode. So today what I want to talk about is moving to Nigeria with kids. So to kind of just go right into it and not waste too much time, I think I'm going to break this up into two different episodes. One is kind of like tips and question answers that people have asked me during our journey. And the other one is kind of just going to be a real talk about bringing kids to, Africa or Nigeria specifically. So let's just get started with the first one here. So when we talk about bringing kids to Nigeria, basically what happens is I get either one of two responses. The first response is either kind of how could you possibly do that? How dare you take your children from Canada and the life there and bring them to, God forbid, Africa and, live in the middle of a bush and, things like that, with the propaganda that people push about Africa and how it's just kind of essentially nothing. That's kind of the response I get. The other response that I get is basically, how could I do that? How can I do what you did? How is it possible? So those are two responses that I typically get. The first one, to respond to that, people with that mentality of kind of how dare you do this, again, I'm going to kind of address this more in my second part, but the opportunity that my kids have here is actually greater than the opportunity my kids have in Canada. With all that's going on in the West right now, if we think about the future for them, it actually holds more profitability in Nigeria here than if we were to stay in Canada. And like I said, I'll kind of go into that more in my second episode here, so I'm not going to touch too much on that. But moving on to number two here is basically people ask me, how can I do it? I mean, when you have that many little kids, we have 5. My oldest just turned 10 a couple months ago, and my youngest just turned 1 a couple months ago. So, between ages 1 and 10, there's a lot of different personalities there and lots of different, emotions and stuff to play. And what do you do with little kids? How does it work? So, basically, just like I said, just to kind of go into it here without wasting too much time, little kids are so resilient and, they really see everything as kind of an adventure. So I think having little kids is a different experience than if you would have older kids. Little kids kind of just, the comforts of life are still essentially kind of here. And it's just a change of environment. So it's not as bad as I was expecting, and everybody adapted super well. So I can't say there's been any real problems. But again, it's kind of, how you set things up. So one of the main things that people ask me is, how are you kids going to school? For us specifically, we did homeschooling in Canada. And so obviously we're just going to continue with homeschooling here. I hate the word homeschooling. It sounds so, I don't know. I don't like the word homeschooling. I like home education or just life education or just, learning in general. My kids are very advanced in certain subjects compared to other kids their age, and they fit in with their age mates on other subjects. So I'm a huge advocate for homeschooling. I want to do a video on it as well, but I honestly I am so for the home education and just teaching your kids. Like, you're the best teacher. I could go on to that for hours just talking about it, but in regards to schooling for us here in Nigeria, before I get too distracted, and I'll go off point about homeschooling, we do homeschooling. So school is not a problem here. One thing that you have to also think about when you come into, Africa, if you're moving abroad, is definitely your finances. So, if you have older kids, you might be able to rough it a little bit more. Kids are resilient, but, obviously you still need to have your finances in order as they're still small. And that kind of goes off. My next one is healthcare as well. So obviously here in Nigeria, healthcare costs something. In Canada, obviously it was covered a little bit more. So definitely having your healthcare in place. So when we were in Canada, our pediatrician was Nigerian. And so he has connections here in Nigeria as well. So we're able to even have connections that way. When we were in the city, we had a hospital in one of the estates that we're in, and we met a pharmacist through there. So any medications that we need to take, we always double check with him just to make sure that they kind of match up and he has the same idea. We have a nurse out where we are here in the village. She's just down the road. So she's a good connection as well. So basically having your connections is very important, definitely with little kids, because you never know what happens, right? Another tip would be pack smart. So again, kids really don't need too much, but there's definitely essentials that your kids need, right? So again, if you have little kids that are in diapers, diapers are available. They are the same, what I'm trying to say. You can get the same essentials here as you can in Canada. You're not going to be without. I mean, they have blankets, obviously. They have diapers. They have kids' clothes. It's not like we're without. And that's one thing that, for me, I came with the idea of let me just bring everything, which is okay. I mean, it definitely used it, but it wasn't necessary because I can obtain what I need to here. So again, you pack smart. You don't need everything. You can get what you need here. So that's definitely something as well. For me, one thing that I also thought was important too, when you're moving with kids, is definitely keeping them in the conversation. Obviously younger ones, they don't really know or realize too much what's going on. But the older ones, I mean, like even my 6-year-old, she's very intuitive and things like that. So just keeping them in the conversation and being realistic to what's happening. Things might be tight for a little bit financially, and so you're still eating 3 square meals a day. They may not be too elaborate, but you're eating, you're full, right? You're okay. But explaining why things are happening and what's going on, where we're moving, and the realistic life experiences, right? And that's kind of why we're doing this in a sense, is because the realistic life experiences that we go through are so important. And that's what teaches us wisdom, right? You don't, in my opinion, for example, when you think about life, if someone were to ask you, what was the best experience you had? What was the thing that changed your life the most? You would never say, oh, it was going to my job 9 to 5 for 30 years. That was the best experience I ever had. That you wouldn't say that, right? Even if you ask a child, what was the best thing? What's the most, the best experience you've ever had? What is something that really impacted you? They would never say, oh, going to school every day, waking up 8 o'clock and coming home at 3:30 was fantastic. I loved it. That's not life, in my opinion. That is not life. But, the reality of life is what gives you wisdom. So bringing your children into an environment where they're forced to learn and grow in real life, there's nothing wrong with that. And all of those naysayers who are saying that, you're bringing your kids, out of Canada, right? Because everybody sees Canada as the golden ticket. But what we're doing here is we're teaching them reality. We're teaching them life. And there's no greater teacher than that. So again, that is definitely something to think about as well. For me, right, there's always the saying, life is the best teacher, and it's the truth. So we have to always keep that at the back of our mind as well. So, when you have kids, some things that, you're going to run into problems, especially with little kids. I mean, life isn't easy. Moving abroad isn't easy. When you have little kids, you're going to have, again, such big emotions. I mean, as an adult, you have emotions, right? As an adult, you have your days of skepticism and your days of, like, what the heck am I doing kind of thing. But, when you have kids, they're feeling the emotions too. And their input matters as well. So one thing that we did as well is kind of on the smaller things, right? Let them make the choices. So for example, obviously the bedding for their beds, they make their choices. The paints on the walls, they make their choices. Like the pillows on the couch, they make their choices of what they want. The little things, let them have an input into what's going on, because so much is out of our control. But whatever we can control, let's let them have the control, right? It allows them to be part of the experience as well. And definitely communicate, right? Because communication is key, especially when you have younger kids. You have to communicate with them. You have to let them know what's going on, the reality of life. So, those are just some things I kind of, when I was thinking about this the other day, like, man, what can I do for kids? Because, I see a lot of videos with people moving abroad and things like that. And either they're all adults or, their kids are in their teens and they're older as well. And, when you have younger kids, it is a very different experience. It's difficult, but you know what? It's really not, because like I said, kids are so resilient and they just see it as one giant adventure. Like when we had one Airbnb, and the first day we got there, their generator caught on fire. And basically it was just this huge commotion, fire got put out, etc., etc. But when you talk about it now, the kids are just like laughing at this experience of, man, this is what happened. This was crazy, like, right? But they're just the adventure and the experiences of life. Traveling in the back of a bus. That's an experience of life. The kids aren't, sitting there and crying. They're experiencing, life. And it's the greatest teacher. So if any of you who are watching are wondering about, bringing your kids abroad, bringing your kids to Nigeria, bring your kids to Africa, yes, you have to be careful. But you should be careful when you're in Canada too, right? Yes, you have to be watching and you have to be, observant to your surroundings. But you should also be doing that in Canada too. The threat isn't just in Africa. There's threat everywhere. So we have to understand and weigh the pros and cons. And that's where I said, like, my second video, I just wanted to kind of do a real talk, of raising kids in Canada, raising kids versus raising kids abroad, right? And so the opportunities here are huge. And so, like I said, I didn't want to touch it too much in this video. I just wanted to kind of give some tips to you guys and, just do some talking, because I do have a lot of parents here in Nigeria giving me the kind of like, what the heck did you just do? Look. Right? And then I have people who I know back in Canada, and they're like, okay, well, how do we do this? How is it possible to just pick everything up and go? So, you know what, guys? My best advice to you would be just, do your best and let the pieces fall where they may, because you can plan and plan and plan, but at the end of the day, right, those plans that you plan may not work. I mean, there might be a whole other plan for what you're supposed to be doing. So take it step by step. Your kids will be fine. Be that rock for them. Let them be able to express themselves. Make sure you have your finances and your healthcare in order. Those are important. If you're doing the homeschooling route, it's not that difficult. Kids learn with anything. And one other point that I want to kind of say as well is, think of where the environment they're in. So, for example, when we were in Canada, we were living on an acreage outside of the city. And so when we moved here to Nigeria, we were in like Lagos. And if anybody knows Lagos, it's like hustle bustle to the extreme. And so for us, even as adults, we were so impacted by that. It was too like overstimulating to our brains because we just weren't used to it. We were used to quiet, like nobody around for like a mile. Our closest neighbor was like a mile away at the very least, right? So, when we were in the cities, all that noise and commotion and people talking and, cars and generators and, just the overstimulating, we did struggle with that. I'm not going to lie, that was very hard. I think that was probably the hardest part. It wasn't the food, because even in Canada, we were eating a lot of the Nigerian foods, the Nigerian dishes. We were eating organic and healthy, so our food didn't change too much. But definitely our environment did when we first came here. So that's something that impacted us. But when we came over here to the village where we are now, the environment is quiet. Like there's nobody around here. Like there's nothing. It's quiet. There's the odd, people talking down the road here and there. But honestly, it's so quiet. And mentally, it's been able to allow us to think properly. So, guys, that's just kind of my little spiel for the first one here. I didn't want to do too much of talking versus Canada versus Nigeria. Just wanted to give you guys some tips and just some like advice. I hope you guys heard something that might be able to help you a little bit or, give you a little bit of inspiration. I can, you could watch a million, tips on how to do life and tips on how to move abroad and, how to pack this and how to pack this and what do you pack. But to be honest with you guys, until you actually do it, it's just a whole different ball game. Things that you can plan, We had our plans too. We had a lot of plans, but when you actually face it, it's always more messy than on paper, so to speak, right? It's just kind of, I always give the example, it's kind of like labor. When you can read all the books you want about having a baby, or you want to, you do all the Lamaze classes, but until you've actually done it, man, it's a whole other story. So, you know what? It's the same thing with everything in life. You can read it in a book, you can study it, you can plan, you can put it down on paper, you can make your daily journal, you can do it all. But you know what? Until you're actually in it, that's when you really learn. And that's essentially the whole point, like I said, of why we've come here, is because experience will teach you. You'll make your mistakes. There's things for me, there's things that I should have, for example, there's things I should have packed that in retrospect would have been beneficial now. But you know what? It's not make or break life. There's things I should have done back when I was Canada that, now I would have benefited from, but it's not make or break life. It's kind of one of those that would have been beneficial, but we can learn and we can grow. So that's my first part of this whole thing, guys. I'm going to be back for the second part. And it's going to be, like I said, a little bit more real talk. So so I'm not going to go into it. Let me just stop it there before this video gets too long and I can't upload it with my internet here. So, I hope that helped you guys a little bit and gave you some little bit of useful pointers and tips on, what to do with kids. You'll be fine. If you have little kids, you'll be fine. Take it slow and you'll get there.